Okay, so this tutorial is going to be a bit of an overview and a bit of a deep dive on out of position players' strategy. Playing out of position specifically with a range advantage or with the pre-flop quote unquote initiative. Basically, as the pre-flop raiser, we're going to focus a bit on attacking these pots out of position. So the learning outcomes for this tutorial, one, we're going to compare and contrast the out of position player strategy to an in position player strategy, and we're also going to discuss the key factors that impact out of position play. All right, so as a bit of a review, I've got 3 questions here. Does anyone have the answers to any of these questions?
Let's see, the first one, checking in position, you get to close the action and see the next card. Checking out of position doesn't close the action, so you're not guaranteed to see the next card.
Good, okay. And so what does that mean?
Means in terms of equity realization, it's a bit more difficult out of position.
All right, what else?
More difficult to manage the pot size.
Yep, that's all correct. And so if it's difficult to manage, all right, go on.
If it's difficult to, since we're not closing the action, you have to check some strong hands, as opposed to in position. Out of position has to check a lot more stronger range than in position, right?
Yeah, that's true. So if out of position does have a checking range, and there's going to be some situations where out of position will bet their entire range, but if out of position does decide to have a checking range, that checking range needs to have some strong hands in it, because if the range is too weak, then in position will just bet their entire range, and so then you get the EV of checking a strong hand goes way up.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have an answer to that? Anything else which you can think about in terms of the difference between checking out of position and checking in position? All right, does anyone else have an answer to any of the other questions?
What does it mean to value bet? I mean, betting with a hand that beats majority of the calling range.
Okay, so in position that might be true, but what about out of position?
So it's kind of a way to realize your equity more easier.
Sorry, was that for value betting?
Yeah, I think value betting out of position, you don't necessarily have to have to be ahead of half of the or 50% of the in position players continuing range. You could be a bit less than that, because what you want to do is protect yourself against being bluffed. So you could be value betting a bit as protection, even though you may not have the best hand.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So protection isn't exactly the right word, but definitely when you're out of position, you don't have to beat more than half of your opponent's continuing range. And the reason why, does anyone know the reason why? If you think about the difference between the EV of betting and the EV of checking, why might that be?
Maybe on the earlier streets, it's equity denial for the to the in position player to deny their equity.
Yep. So maybe we can talk about equity denial. So how are you going to define equity denial? What do you mean when you say equity denial?
So let's say you have a hand that might have, you're out of position, you're on an earlier street, you might have, I don't know, maybe 40% equity or just under 50% equity. You'll want to bet it because you don't want hands in the folding range to outdraw you, the in-position players. You want to get those hands to fold out, so you're kind of denying that equity.
Okay, so when we bet for equity denial, do we always want our opponent to fold? Or do we always want our opponent to have a hand in their range, which, or do we always want weaker hands to fold?
No. But equity denial bet is still a value bet, though, right? Because like if you're betting for equity denial, we also are betting because there are some hands that are just gonna call, and we beat them.
Yep. Okay, so it's not necessarily a value bet. So not all equity denial bets are value bets, right? For example, say that you're in position and you bet to sort of deny bluffs, then I guess you can say that it is, in essence, a value bet. But you can also be bluffing when you're trying to deny equity.
Well, yeah, all bluffs deny equity, right? Like.
Yep. So the difference is that it's not necessarily that you're trying to get your opponent to fold. It's just necessary to get them to put more money in order to see the next street.
Yeah.
So there's a subtle difference there, right? You're not trying to get them to fold. You're just trying to get them to pay you to see the next street, or put money into the pot in order to see the next street. That doesn't. It's a different thing from trying to get them to fold. All right, so going back to value bet. So we know that when we're out of position, we can value bet hands with less than 50% against their calling range. And the reason why that might be is because our checking EV is going to be lowered, right? If we check, our opponent will bet some hands, and that would lower our checking EV. So as long as our betting EV is higher than our checking EV, we can value bet. Even if that means that when we're called by more hands that beat us than lose to us. All right, so is that clear to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, are you talking about the checking and betting EV of a specific hand, or the range you're betting or checking with?
Well, the checking EV or a betting EV of a range is just the sum, is just the average of the betting and checking EVs of all the hands within that range. So whenever you talk about EV, you're always talking about the EV of a specific hand, even though the EV of other hands in your range can impact the EV of the hand that you're holding in front of you. Right? So it's a bit nuanced. When you talk about EV, it's always the EV of the hand in front of you, but that EV is in context of the two ranges of both players.
Remember, you could have a decision where you split your ranges, and the range that you're betting has a higher EV for betting, and then the range that you're checking has a higher checking EV. Does that make sense to split your range that way, or are you talking about your entire range?
Okay, so when we bet, we're betting in an attempt to increase our EV. So betting ranges by default are going to have higher EV than checking ranges. Okay, so for a specific hand, it might have a higher checking EV than betting EV.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which means that for that hand, you would always check. But here, when we're talking about value bets, if we're out of position and we wanted to value bet, then if we were to check, we have a checking EV which is not equal to our showdown value because our opponent is still left to act after us and they can bet. All right. And so the chance that they bet with a stronger hand, all of that reduces our EV. Okay, so then if we're value betting, we only have to value bet to increase our betting EV above our checking EV. And that's not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean that against the range which calls, we have more than 50% equity. So there's a lot of spots where you can bet, and usually using a small bet, with a hand with less than 50% equity against the calling range, the continuing range. But that's still a value bet.
Right, because there's more EV in that process rather than checking.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so does anyone have an answer to the last question? How is bluffing with draws different when we're out of position compared to in position?
You can't really check call your draws out of position for 2 streets, right? I mean, I've seen some simulations that do that, but very, very rarely. So I guess we need to bluff more out of position and we have a draw. I don't know.
Yeah, I've seen some simulations where flush draws are check called twice.
Yeah, it was weird, but like without any showdown value, simulation was check calling them twice, and then check folding the river, which is weird.
Okay, so think maybe back to the draw bluffs video. From that, how is bluffing with the draw different out of position compared to in position?
So bluffing with draws, the in-position player, as I recall, his EV is increased when he's betting as opposed to checking. When he checks, he gets to see the next card, and he'll realize some equity in this. He'll get the realized equity in his draw, but he will get more equity if he bets the in-position player. So the out-of-position player may not necessarily get that opportunity because when he checks, he's not guaranteed to see the next card. I think that's the difference. The in-position player can check and is guaranteed to see the next card, but he'll still want to bet because he gets more EV when he bets his draws. Maybe the out-of-position player needs to bet his draws as opposed. I don't know. I'm confused.
All right, so sort of in general, just from the draw bluffs video, I went through 2 different spots where it was the nuts and a draw was one player's range and another player's range was a bluff catcher, and I compared sort of in position to out of position. And in that video, in position can just bet all their nuts and then bluff appropriately with draws in order to balance that betting range. The draws when we're in position have some checking EV, and so when we decide to bet in position with a draw, our opponent needs to fold such that our betting EV is the same as our checking EV. Now, when we're out of position, a similar sort of thing is true, but if we decide to check a draw, if we decide to check a range of only draws, then our opponent will always bet, right? Even with a bluff catcher. And so this means that some of our range that we check has to have some sort of traps in it with the intention of check raising. Okay, so if our range is constructed where we have, if our checking range is constructed where we have a small percentage of traps and a lot of draws, our opponent has to bet into that in order to try and deny the equity of our draws, knowing that when we continue, we're continuing as a check raise with traps. right? So this basically means that we can force our opponent to bet purely for equity denial, but not really as a value bet. Okay, so that's sort of the difference. The checking EV of draws is lower, and so that means that our opponent has to fold a lot less than when we're in position, bluffing with draws. Okay, so thinking about all of this, maybe another question. If we bet and we're out of position, does our opponent... How should our opponent defend? Should our opponent ever fold? Should our opponent often fold more than alpha? When we're out of position,
No.
when we're out of position, there's quite a few spots where our opponent can fold more than alpha, but when we're when we're in position and we see bet, there's a lot of spots where our opponent can fold more than alpha, and the reason why is because of the checking EV of our bluffs. But when we're out of position, the checking EV bluffs is relatively low, so our opponents can't fold more than alpha very often. All right, so is everyone keeping up with that so far? Does anyone have any questions before we continue?
Yeah, you mentioned traps when out of position. In order to be able to check call with bluffs, you need to have some traps so you can check raise. Now on the river, I think in your bluffing with draws video, you talked about leading when the draw misses with your traps in order to have a balanced betting range consisting of your value hands and your missed and some of your missed draws. So does that imply in real poker that on the river, if you do have some traps on the river card and you missed your draw, that you should be donking because you're not always guaranteed to get a check raise on the river?
All right, so there's two different things, right? So if you have a range, if you have a polarized range, right, which we want to bet with, okay, so if we have a polarized range, we're often going to be wanting to bet, but we also have to check some draws, okay, because of how the two ranges are constructed. We can't bet our entire range. So if we can't bet our entire range, we're going to have a checking range. And if we have a checking range, the checking range will be composed of mostly draws and some traps. Okay, so then when we check, our opponent bets. Most of the time we're going to fold, and the rest of the time we're going to check raise. Okay, which is different to what you're talking about, where you have more of a condensed range where you check call with a draw, and then you miss. And often you'll see in solvers that they with the larger sims rather than the smaller sims. I think what you guys have found is just some weird stuff with smaller sims, but definitely with larger sims, ranges will be constructed so that when you get to the river, you just don't have air very often, right? And if you do have air, that air will donk. So when you do get to the river with just a draw and no showdown value, often you'll have a small percentage of donks to make up with that. And that's okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So you're donking on the river in these large sims where you have some strong hands, some traps, and some air. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay. But for the most part, you're check raising on the flop with your traps and some of your draws, or in your draws.
Yeah. So when we're talking about defending out of position, yeah, then you would do that. Okay. So right, approach and stuff we already talked about. We're checking out of position. We have some strong hands to call or raise the bet. So our checking range can't be just air. if we did go like if we did bet a few streets and then check, like a lot of that range can be air, but some of that should still call or raise against a bet, which is what we've just talked about here, right? Bluffing the draws, right? Where we check a range, mostly draws and some traps, and then we face a bet, like almost all the draws fold, and then we check raise with the traps and the draws. Same sort of thing here. If we bet a few streets and become very polar, when we check the river, often that is to give up. And when we're checking out of position and we face a bet, we can overfold because of the checking EV of the in-position player's bluffs, which is not necessarily true if we decide to bet. Right, the in-position player has to call enough to make, has to call enough to stop our bluffs from being immediately profitable, because our checks for our weak hands are going to be very close to 0 EV.
So this checking EV of impositions, bluffs, these are not necessarily a draw type EV. This is more EV that's being given up, given that he turned a potentially weak hand into a bluff.
Yeah, so it's a bit of both, right? So it's difficult to say, right? So say in position you've got 6 high, is the 6 outs, is the 6 one pair outs to bottom pair a draw, right? That's questionable, but it still makes up some of your EV. There's still a chance that you hit one of those 6 outs. So you got 6-5. There's still a chance that you hit a 6 or a 5, and then check down and win against ace high. So is that a draw? Well, yeah, sort of. It's just a very, very weak draw. But there's still some checking EV associated with that. There's also checking EV associated with checking back and then bluffing the river. Remember that when we're in position on the river, our bluffs will have EV equal to the checking EV of the strongest bluff. So you say that the strongest bluff that we have on the river has a checking EV of 10% of the pot, then suddenly all the hands weaker than that will have a bluffing EV of 10%. And so that's another way we can have EV on the flop, right? Because of that line where we check, 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 and then bluff the river. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Is that an adequate description of where the EV of like these really weak hands comes from?
Yeah, I think it's a good description. I may have to listen to it again to make sure I fully grasp it.
Does anyone else have problems with that description? I can try and maybe when we go through a sim, I'll show you what I mean a bit better. All right, so yeah, c-bet sizing. If we're at a position and we c-bet the flop, often our sizing is actually pretty small, and this it's a lot smaller than you would think, sort of like in the half pot or less range, and often sort of quarter pot, and even like you can see some sims where they just choose to min bet, right? Say if you got a small blind versus a big blind situation, they can go really small, and this allows us to bet wider and deny equity more efficiently. But when the in-position play does call, we often just check the turn because they have a stronger range than us then.
So we're betting small to deny equity?
Yeah, so betting small lets us deny equity a lot better.
But like the in-position player is just gonna call with like, I don't know, 80% of his range, then
yeah. So remember the difference between deny equity and trying to get them to fold?
Yeah.
Does that make sense now? All right.
Yeah.
So I guess with that we can go through that. Sorry, do you have a question?
No, I was just thinking about denying equity, and if let's say the in-position player has 2 overcards that don't line up with the board texture. There's no flush draws or backdoor flush draws. This in-position player still has 6 outs to improve. So how does a small bet size deny him from just floating with those 2 overcards?
No, so denying is getting to pay. It's getting to them to pay to see the outs of those overcards. Right. So if they want to float, that's okay, but they've paid our bet to see the next street.
Right, and we just need to make sure that we size our bet enough to get them to overpay for those 2 cards, right? For those 6 outs.
Well, 6 outs over 1 street is like 12 or 14%, which is not a lot, and it's actually pretty difficult to bet small enough such that the pot odds is that low, right? So even if we're like in a small blind versus a big blind spot, if you bet 1 big blind into 6, they're calling 1 to win 8. So then that's pretty much roughly the EV of calling with 6 outs to see the next street.
Okay, and then
the equity of calling.
And then we want to check the turn. Right, and so we obviously don't want to, if in this case, if we check the turn and we're betting with a hand we're willing to fold, we obviously don't want to call their turn bet, because we would have. What you want to do is punish them for overpaying, but you don't want to pay them off.
Yeah, so that goes a lot into bluffing out of position. So if we're out of position and we do bluff, a lot of the EV that we give back, a lot of our give ups is when we check. So we're going to be checking quite a bit often because we have so many hands which check to give up.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and our opponent is allowed to float us. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that because we know that if we check, our opponent's going to stab a lot, or they should stab quite a reasonable amount with it, because they floated the flop. This means that we should check a lot as well. So I guess we can go through one of the hand histories. Which one did I find interesting? Yeah, so the 10-8 hand. Replay it. So Salim, did you want to talk us through what you were thinking when you were playing this hand?
Yeah. I don't think 8-10 offsuit is a loose open. And yeah, my question is basically this part. So can we pause this? The rest is not important. So I'm opening small blind for 3 big blinds, and when this flop comes, I used to bet small, 1/3, but then I realized that people were just not folding, and I was just forced to check folding the turn a lot. And so I kind of changed my strategy to, bet a little bit bigger and probably check more out of position. And so I do this here, and I get raised, and I don't know if this is a call on the flop, because we have 6 clean outs. We have 6 clean outs, and that's it. And the problem is not the turn. Like when this turn comes, I check fold. This is cool, but like when the turn comes, like 3 of spades, I have no idea what to do. And I don't even know if my c-bet, if I should c-bet this 100%, if I should check this a little bit more. I don't know. I guess I didn't really think much when what I was doing here.
Okay, so yeah, I can get behind the c-bet, and when you get raised, calling seems okay as well.
Okay, but how can it be okay? Like I have like 6 outs, and I have no idea what I'm going to do on the
So
turn.
6 outs and all those outs to the nuts. So you got 6 outs to the nuts and then like 2 outs to,
yeah, 2 outs.
Like a non-nutted but pretty strong hand, and then also you have an additional 6 outs to a pair, which you shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah, probably. Okay, I get that, but okay, calling on the flop is fine, but the turn is just not gonna like how I don't know how to play the turns. Even if like this turn, of course, is I'm just gonna check fold, but even if the turn is a brick, this is why I said I don't get how check calling draws out of position twice is gonna be okay, even though simulations do it sometimes.
Yeah, so it depends on how strong the draw is. Obviously on this and even on some bricks, if you're facing a larger bet, then you can fold. But if you're facing a smaller bet, then you can just re-raise. So a lot of the time when we face a raise on the flop, like you did here, a lot of our stronger hands are still going to just call, right? So you would still have aces, right? You would probably still have nines just flatting. And then when you do choose to have a 3-bet sort of range, it would be more in terms of not the super strong stuff, but like definitely sevens and like ace 9 and maybe ace 7. See if the sim is done. So I've run a sim here on this spot, but it's not very good. We can have a look at it quickly.
Oh, and this one.
Yeah, on this spot. So you sent it early enough, and I run it like a 10-minute sim. So it's not very. The tree isn't very big. All right. So we can have a look. So here, yeah, quarter pot is the size chosen for this sim, and we can have a look at the tree if you guys want to have a look at the tree. It was just a quick estimate. So 100% pot bet sizes, and each bet's got a pot size bet or a 3x pot over bet, but we're just looking at the flop bet size. Anyway, so looking at it, so yeah, quarter pot is what's common in this small one. This is a big blind spot. Right, so if you look at the preflop ranges here, the small blinds preflop range, and this is big blinds, you can see how much weaker big blinds is compared to small blinds. So knowing that just on so many different flops, you're going to be wanting to bet pretty wide and small in order to try and deny equity. You're forcing them to float in order to, like, you're forcing them to float here with the king high, with a spade, right? Queen high with a spade and a backdoor, those kinds of stuff. So forcing your opponent to float, it's not a bad thing. That's like you guys say, oh, my opponent floats. That's not a bad thing, right? Betting small enough, you want your opponent to have to float in order to make your bluffs indifferent.
But I don't really see a lot of tough floats here. I don't know, but like I think like floating queen 8 with one spade is kind of standard. Like I don't think any reg would have a problem with that. Or, well, 4-5 is kind of getting there, but
that's okay. Either way, knowing that after, and you can see how often you're being raised as well.
Yeah.
So say you bet small instead of betting the half pot. So if you look at the half pot, all the floats just fold, right?
Yeah.
Say you bet quarter pot, and then like you have to have queen jack and like king queen floats. They just have to float, right, in order to make your bluffs sort of indifferent. And notice here in this spot, they're folding a little bit more than alpha. You can think about why that might be. Alpha here is 0.2, so 20%. You can think about why they're folding a little bit more, and it's got to do with the checking EV. So if you check, they're checking back quite a bit of the time as well. Anyway, maybe if I run a bigger tree, then they would no longer fold more than alpha. Anyway, so knowing that, they have to float quite a bit. So when they call and it bricks, you have to check a lot, and you're checking a lot. So this is when they call, not when they raise. So we can look at when they raise later, but we can just have a look at sort of the general themes of the small blind versus big blind type stuff. Okay, so we bet quarter pot and then they call, and then it's like a brick, right? Absolute brick. So this goes the bet call line, not the bet raise call line. So the bet call line, and now here for the three sizes, this is a three of a bet pot and then check. Right, there's a lot of checking, and if the sim was a lot bigger with more smaller bet sizes, some of those might be used as well. But I imagine the checking frequency would still be pretty high, and a lot of checking is to fold, because remember on the flop, a lot of the hands are quote unquote just bluffs, and so we need to give that EV back to our opponent's call by check folding at a slightly higher frequency. So if we check, our opponent pots it, then we can fold 55%. Right. Okay, so now looking at the bet raise line. So the bet raise, so there's the raise. We continue and say then on a brick. Is it this sort of the spot you're having trouble with? So 10-8 is okay, and then if they pot it, right, I don't have any small size in this tree. Or if they pot it, it's obviously a fold. And if they bet a smaller size, you can have a look at what the checking EV of your 10-8 is. Right, so here the checking EV is about a quarter of the pot. Right, and it makes sense for that to go down. For that to be pretty small because of how much weaker your draw has become after the turn bricks out. So knowing that, if it goes check, then that's good for you. But if we face a bet, then that's pretty bad. So you have to think about how often your opponent is going to check. So like when you face these like flop raises in position, so we bet the flop for whatever our size is, and then we face a raise, how often is our opponent checking back the next street? And so then you can think about how you're going to make exploitative adjustments using that idea of how often is our opponent checking back the next street. So if our opponent isn't checking back the next street very often, then maybe these 7s and 9s and S9 go from being raises to calls, and some of these weaker hands which we decide to call with become folds. All right, do you have any other questions about this hand? I just wanted to go through that sim quickly. It's not a very big sim, but maybe it gives you a bit of insight.
Is 10-8 ever a check raise on the flop?
Yeah, so definitely, right. So if you do have a checking range, then you can raise when your opponent bets. So bet, and so 10-8 can be a raise. Here it's just a flat, but you can have some raising hands as well. Against a smaller bet, one less than pot, I would imagine that 10-8 will be raised after you check it quite a bit in order for you to have some.
The fact that you're facing a pot bet on the flop, right? Is that why it's a call?
The fact that you're facing a pot size bet on the flop and that the sim isn't very big, it's probably why it's a call here.
But on this flop, we should be betting most of our range.
Yeah, so you can see we're betting like 70% of the time, and if the tree was bigger, it might be pushed up. So as I was saying, do you have any more questions about this specific hand?
No, thank you.
So if you had a club, then you can probably play it out of position. That's okay, and then maybe donk. Yeah, okay. On this one, and then maybe donk the river, or maybe check raise. Just your opponent bets small. Right. The thing is with like these small bets after they raise the flop, they're just going to be checking back the river a lot. So you want to prevent that somehow, either by raising the street or donking the next street.
Okay.
Okay, maybe before we continue into the 3-bet stuff, we can have a look at this hand. So George, this is your hand. How about you talk us through what you were thinking when you played this hand?
Okay, so I'm in the small blind. Under the gun limps in. I think it's pretty standard that I raise them out of the small blind to isolate them. Then on this flop, what I'm thinking here is that it's a good flop for my range. It's paired. And when I look at my specific hand, I'm thinking, okay, well, it's okay to c-bet this flop because there's cards on the turn I can continue with. I can obviously improve to a flush. I can pick up straight draws. So I bet again. And then I'm thinking there is that if the turn comes a blank, I still have a opportunity to make a flush by the river. And if it's also a blank and I haven't bet the turn, it's kind of showing me that the villain is capped in his range. So when the brick comes on the turn, the 4 clubs, I look to bet again. So that's my thinking at this point. I see the 4 clubs as a good card for my range, and I can continue to barrel it.
All right. Does anyone else have? Does anyone have an opinion on what George has said? Someone's got a loop, so maybe they want to turn on their speakers.
Is it me? I don't think so. Okay. I think preflop is almost always a complete. And even exploitatively, this is a complete. Like, I know from the versus limp charts that this is, like, we should be limping kings here if the under the gun is limping optimally. But odds are he's not limping optimally. Even then, exploitatively, I think this is just going to be a complete. Because...
So here, this is the small one versus limp.
Yeah.
Small blind, I'm a little okay with raising here, with raising these hands. But like big blinds, then big blind versus limp, you can consider checking king some of the times.
Okay. This is hijack, right?
Yep.
It should be low jack.
There's only 5 players here.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So why is this a complete?
Because raising doesn't really accomplish much. You're going to be out of position, and there's a big blind who has position on you. He might, like if you're raising this is too weak to isolate out of position, I think. I don't know. Maybe it's okay.
Well,
you think about it in terms of EV, right? So the completing EV, you lose half a small blind in order to see a flop.
Yeah.
And your hand is okay, and it plays reasonably well multi-way, even out of position, because it can flop strong draws as well as straights and stuff.
And the size is just too big.
When my ISO out of position is 5 big blinds.
Okay. Okay.
When you do decide to ISO, you want to just be like here the hijack limping, like it's got some like queens and stuff because of the times that small blind wants to ISO you, and then hijack folds, and then you can re-raise queens, that kind of stuff. Maybe kings should be in there, but I think kings is okay to ISO, even a low jack limper. Right, so that kind of stuff. Anyway,
but this size is like, you're using this size because your range is somewhat polarized, quote unquote, isn't it?
well, a pot size raise would just be 4 big blinds, and so you go a little bit more than 4 big blinds, right? So 5 is okay, right? So if you notice, all of my out of position raises, so like a 3-bet ISO kind of stuff, a little bit more than a pot, a little bit more than a pot size raise. So that's the rationale behind that.
Can we say that, like, when we isolate like this, we are we're playing like how we play in a 3-bet pot?
Yeah, it's a lot more of like a 3-bet kind of range.
Oh, okay, nice. Because I don't know how to play these pots, so I just play like I'm playing a 3-bet pot.
Yeah, that's fine. Even though the stack depth is going to be quite a bit deeper, but not too deep. It would be like playing a 3-bet pot 200 big blinds deep.
Okay.
In terms of like the stack depth. Anyway, so you bet the flop.
I'm still a bit lost as to why. Okay, there's the exploitative reason, which we'll put aside. I mean, this is from a pre-flop sim, isn't it? So this is an optimal versus hijack limp chart we're looking at.
Well, the closest you might get is Snowy, and it would like be a lot more pocket pair heavy, because its raise size will be smaller than this. Yeah, okay, so if we have a look at, so this is versus limp, right? So if you're confused about why 10-8 is a complete, so if you just look at this at the big blind versus the limp, this is what it is, right? So you can see that kings is being checked some of the times, and queens and jacks are being checked most of the times, right? And the reason behind this is that the checking EV is very high because you're checking 100%, and if you're checking 100%, hijack will c-bet 100% of the time on basically any flop because of the massive range difference. Okay, and so knowing that you need to have, well, you know that you need to have these strong hands in it, just the EV of having those strong hands in it is very high. And if you had looked at Snowy would probably definitely check kings against the low jack, and then queens and jacks against the hijack, because of that reason. So the small blind is pretty similar, except the calling EV, then you're not facing a check, so you're not checking, right? So these these hands here, they can fold because of, you have to put half a big blind in order to complete. And then when you do complete, you're still out of position against the big blind who might squeeze. So your range is still pretty wide, and your calling range is going to be wider than, your completing range is going to be wider than the hijack's opening range, but not quite as wide. And because of your multi-way, having kings in that range is not as necessary for defending out of position multi-way. Having queens and ace king off in that range is mainly for the times that the button decides to isolate you.
Can we have a quick look, Thomas, at the small blind versus hijack open? You know, a 2 or 3 big blind open. I just want to.
This one versus hijack open, 10-8 is quite a fold there.
Okay, so 10-9 is sometimes raise, sometimes fold, right?
Yeah, sometimes raise, mostly fold.
Mostly fold. 7-6, 5-4. Yeah, I guess I got to look at these charts a bit more and try to peel into why. Because I kind of look at that limp as just giving me more of a reason to isolate and to be able to 3-bet with or to raise with a wider range, which is why I picked 10-8 student. I don't quite get why we're just calling.
So the limps aren't necessarily too much weaker than a 2 big blind open range. Right.
In theory.
Yeah, so in theory, so if you're up against a player that plays only limp or fold, then it should be roughly the same as a 2 big blind open range. Right. So it should look something like this. So it's cut off. So this is hijack. So it should look something like this, maybe with just all of the pink hands and all the red. If you just limp everything, right? If you're doing that sort of strategy.
But the limping range is slightly tighter, right?
Yeah, it should be slightly tighter because you don't get the ability to get the big blind to fold, and you're basically just inviting people in position against you, right? So that's why the hijack, if it limps, it should be slightly tighter, but against most players, it's going to be weaker and wider. So exploitatively, right, you might want to raise more of these optional hands, but still 10-8 would be a complete.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, say you had trying to find a hand without a 9 in it. Queen 10 of hearts. Okay, so
that's raise or call. Yeah.
Yeah, so you had queen 10 of hearts. Then when you bet the flop and they call, okay, and the turn comes a brick. So if the turn comes a brick, this is a bad card for your range.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to explain why?
On this flop, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, but basically, why bricks? Why if you bet the flop and the turn is a brick, why that's in general bad for your range?
Because the in position player called and nothing changed on the turn, so
the fact that he called, his equity would have gone up.
His hand is better. His range is better.
Nothing has changed on the turn, right?
Yeah, so his range is going to be just stronger because none of your bluffs improve. Okay, so when you bet, you're betting with some sort of polarity, some strong hands as well as some hands as a bluff. And so when the turn is a brick, none of your bluffs get better, and your opponent's range is tighter than on the previous street. So your range in comparison to theirs becomes a lot weaker. And so you would want to check a lot more.
Yeah, I understand it completely now. I'm glad you mentioned that because my question here is then if the turn card improves cards in both players' ranges, that's also not good for you, right? Because he could be drawing with a flush draw. He could be calling with a flush draw, and if the flush card comes, I mean, in both cases, it's not necessarily good for the out of position player, right? Whether a brick comes or a draw completing card comes.
Well, usually the draw completing cards will be better for your range because your range will have the draws will improve those hands, right? So it's not necessarily that the strong hands on the previous street. So like if you had a 9, it's not necessarily that the EV of those hands would go up, but the EVs of your draws will go up, and because you have more draws which is completed than 9s. Then the EV of your range goes up on average. Maybe a clearer example is if
I guess
if the turn was an ace, right? So that if the turn was like an offsuit ace, that still completes some of your ace high bluffs,
right?
Right.
Yep.
And so you're going to be wanting to bet again more often because you can fold out pairs.
Are you making a distinction, Thomas, between bluffs and semi-bluffs when you say this? Because I mean, I'm thinking about the in-position player calling your c-bet with like a ace-high flush draw, and you could be bluffing with a weaker flush draw, and then the flush completes. That's not sure your 9s. Sure, you have more flush draws than 9s that would have improved, but your in-position player also has flush draws.
But you have more ace-high flush draws than the in-position player, because in-position player could have limp 3-bet you with something like ace king suited.
Okay.
Is that true?
I'm just thinking of the distribution of flush draws that both the in position and out of position player has, and I mean, I've always read in the text that when the turn improves the ranges in both players, or improves hands in both players' ranges, that this tends to favor the in position player.
All right, so I'll show you guys a similar sort of sim that's sort of similar to the spot. Maybe maybe it's not actually. Might need a 3-bet sim, but basically, say this was instead small blind versus big blind. I'll show you a similar sort of sim. So this would be small blind versus big blind in a single raise pot on 10-10-5 with a flush draw, right? Not exactly the same spot as you have, because the spot that you have, the ranges are going to be way tighter. But here with the wide ranges, like a small bet is preferred. Right, this quarter pot bet size is used quite a bit. And then we can, if they call, we can have a look at how the EV of the different hands, the different turn cards, how different turn cards impact each player's EV, right? So turns which are like bricks in the lower EV will reduce. We'll have lower EV for your turn range than cards which sort of complete draws, and basically these overcards and these flush draw completing turn cards have high EV for your range than like an absolute brick or a 5.
I think the penny just dropped on this one. The fact that you bet small, you've got a higher density of flush draws in your betting range than the density of flush draws that the in position player is calling with, because you bet small, he's calling with a wider range. So his density of flush draws is less than yours?
Yep, so that's true as well. So
I'm wondering if that is the point.
basically, when you bet, right, when you bet the flop, the density of draws, right, the density of you're going to be bluffing way more often than you're value betting. If you can think about it in that sort of sense, right? The very strong hands are going to make up a very small part of your range, and most of your range is just going to be either sort of like a milling hand, which only wants to bet one street, or some sort of draw bluff type hand, which can hope to outdraw some of your opponent's calls.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so if you bet and your opponent calls, and some of those draws complete, then the EV of your range is going to go up, right? Even if the EV of the value on the previous street, even if the EV of those specific hands goes down, it's offset by the slight increase in EV over a larger part of your range. So if you're betting with like Queen Jack high with an EV of around 1/6 of the pot, so you bet and are called, and now it's a queen, right? Queen Jack high goes from an EV of 1/6 of the pot up to from 1 big blind EV in terms of EV up to 7 big blinds, right? 7/9 of the pot in terms of EV. So a lot of EV to be gained by the draws completing, right? And you might not think of queen high as a draw, but in these wide range spots, pair draws, and even in narrower range spots, pair draws on average are quite important and not to be underestimated in terms of the impact of play.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anyway, so when you're called, on average, the under the gun's calling range is going to be a lot stronger than yours.
Right.
And under the gun is going to stab quite frequently when you check. And so I know that you're just, I know you have just a flush draw here, but you have to think about all the hands in your range.
Right.
Okay, so think about all the hands in your range. If it's high EV to check a very strong hand, check with the intention of calling or check with the intention of raising, say like a 9, then that would be checked instead. And so because that's checked, you can't bluff this hand because you would be unbalanced. You'd be bluffing too much.
Yeah, I'm with you now. I think seeing how the 4 is not a good card for my range. It wouldn't make sense to continue betting here.
Yeah. So if you wanted to bet, like, I'm not saying that the bet is bad. It's just that on average you want to be checking this quite frequently.
Right.
So here, say looking at this sim.
Yeah, bet call, his EV goes up. Yeah.
Yeah. So quarter pot, and say they call, and then the turns like a brick 3. Sure, you're going to have some flush draws which want to bet, and definitely the weaker ones can keep betting, right? But a lot of the range is checked, right? So more than 80% of the range just decides to check. And if the sim was bigger and I had more bet sizes, that checking frequency might go down a little bit with some smaller bet sizes being used. But still checking quite often.
So the equity, I'm seeing 53% down there on the equity when checking, right?
Yeah, so this is the overall range versus the range equity.
This is small blind versus big blind, right?
Yeah, it's a small one versus a big one. Not exactly the same spot as yours, but...
But what does the GTO plus do with his flush draws on the turn? Like, he checks and opponent is going to stab, I think.
Yeah, so if it checks
he
stab...
actually checks a lot back. Wow. I didn't think so. Oh, because we are checking so much. Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
So, like, you got to think about how often you're going to get stabbed after you, how often they're going to stab after you check, right? So if they're just stabbing way often, they're stabbing a lot, then checking becomes really good out of position.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So it's kind of like, why do you want to play out of position, right? Why do you want to bet if your opponent can bet for you? Yeah,
okay. But when we check and he bets, what are we doing with our flush draws?
This is for a pot size bet, so it might not be as... So this was just to get an idea of how the flop works. But if there was some more bet sizes for each player on the street, on each street,
even against the,
then even a smaller bet, or even against a pot size bet, the flush draws are still calling.
Oh, calling. Okay.
Yeah.
But the ace high ones.
Yeah. Well,
what about the other ones
that were weaker than ace high? Almost always.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And then after it goes check, all the flush draws decide to either call or raise. So the weaker flush draws, the flush draws without showdown value, are going to raise.
Okay.
And the ones which are like king high or stronger, because king high has some inherent showdown value, with ranges this wide, then it's just going to call. Right, because either it can hit a king and then beat all the pairs, or it can just go check and win against queen high. Which they should have quite a bit here, right, on this sort of board, like a 9-8, 8-7 kind of thing. So bet, and then say another, difficult to find another brick, 4, whatever, right, check, and then they should be checking back some 9 high type stuff, right, some hands which are weaker than king high, and so your king high will win at showdown against queen high, which they should be checking back.
Okay.
Jack, do you have any questions about this? You haven't spoken much. Just want to make sure that you're keeping up.
Yeah, I'm keeping up.
Do you have any questions about the stuff that we've talked about so far?
I'm trying to catch up.
All right. If you have any questions, just ask. Okay, so what else? Do we have any other sort of single raise pots? Where we were the preflop raiser? No, I don't think so.
Oh, is there none? Oh, okay.
Oh no, wait. This That's okay. We can talk about 3-bet pots. Okay, so moving on to 3-bet pots. So in 3-bet pots as the preflop raiser, because of the 3-bet, it depends on definitely what your 3-bet size is, and that will determine what kind of range difference you'll have on most flops. With the Zenith ranges, when we're 3-betting to 4x out of position, and I might or might not update them soon to sort of increase that to maybe 4.5x. Knowing that, if we 3-bet to 4x out of position and we're called, often our range will be quite a lot tighter than our opponent's calling range, and this means that on a lot of different flops, we're going to have a good range advantage over our opponents, and so we can bet pretty wide, and often we can see about our entire range. And then after we're called, we're going to go into check call mode a lot. With we're going to check. We check a lot on the turn, right? So when we bet in 3-bet pots, we don't have to barrel off. We can bet the flop and then check the turn, which is a lot of what you'll see in the single raise pot as well, right? So in the single raise pot, we were betting quite frequently on the flop and then checking a lot on the turn. It's the same sort of idea in 3-bet pots, and that's in general the idea. With out of position play in general, you've got to bet a lot on the flop in an attempt to deny equity, and then on the next street you can polarize. You can become quite more polarized with your betting, and then because you're more polar when you bet, your checking frequency goes up compared to your betting frequency. And when you check and your opponent stabs, you're going to want to have some check raises. Okay, so we can have a look at some of the 3-bet pots. So the first one I saw was Jack's hand. All right. So Jack, how about you talk us through what you were thinking when you played this hand?
Right. I think that this flop kind of we have range advantage, and the turn comes a brick. So the king on the flop is kind of give high equity to our range. I don't know.
You're not sure. Just talk us through what you were thinking maybe at the time for each decision. So start at pre-flop. So are you happy with your pre-flop decision, and why you decided to do that pre-flop, and then on the flop why you decided to bet, on the turn why you decided to bet, on the river why you decided to bet. So just talk us through that.
So pre-flop, I got ace king, ace queen offsuit, right? I can see the hand. Ace queen offsuit. I think this hand is have high equity and block some of the strongest hand. So I 3-bet. I decide to half pot. I might see bet my whole range in this board, on this board. And when the turn comes weak, I often continue with it. And on the river, I have no idea, honestly.
All right. Does anyone else have some comments about this hand?
Pre-flop.
Well, yeah, go ahead on the pre-flop. I was going to talk about the turn.
Okay, I think pre-flop is mostly a call. I actually had a discussion about this in the upswing engage group as well. This is usually a call because as the buttons raise gets smaller, we should be calling more. I mean, this is a optional 3-bet, I guess. So I don't have a problem with the 3-bet, but sometimes it's a call. I would say it's half-half. And then on the flop, I would rather, well, actually, this is a bit drawy board, so I think half pot is fine. But I would still go small. And on the
You go
turn,
for small bet?
yeah, I go. I mean, I go for a small bet on every flop in 3-bet pots, but that's just me. But like, I think betting half pot on this flop is fine. And on the turn, I think, well, I think we have better bluffs, to be honest. But I don't know.
Well,
We
is
kind
this
of blocked
turn
the
card,
queen.
is this turn card similar to the turn card I came across in that it's doesn't really change too much in terms of players' ranges, and in position has a stronger range, so we should be checking a lot. I mean, is that the right way of looking at it?
Probably, but we do block the queen jack of diamonds, so I think that's a good hand to block, which is gonna call for sure, and the queen 10 of diamonds.
Yeah, so I think George hit the nail on the head there with this is sort of just like a brick. So when it's a brick, you want to be checking a lot more. And then, what do you guys think about the river?
I think if I check, William will bluff. So with much of his range that I can quite call with. That's what my thought.
Yeah,
It's kind of hard to call than to bet myself.
Yeah, so this is a hand that is sort of like borderline showdown value, but also you don't want to get bluffed off it. Could this be an example of one of those 40% equity hands on the river you want to bet?
Okay, so remember the 40% hands, right? You have to get called by worse. So if you went all in, can you get called by worse?
Yeah,
No.
that's the question.
So
Probably
we want
not.
to bet like very small. Do we?
Yeah, so if you wanted to try and bet really small as a value bet,
still not a value bet though.
Yeah, it is. It does seem dubious. You have to get called by a lot of nines.
Yeah, this is a bluff, and you shove for sure.
Yeah, so if it's a bluff, then like it's a pretty odd one, because you end up folding out all the worst hands and only getting called by all the better hands. Basically because it has too much trading value to be used as a bluff. So, Jack, because you were the first one, I ran a sim on this. So for this spot, this is using the this is not these ranges. This is just an estimate using the 2 big blind open, right? So this is for a 2 big blind open, not for a 2.5 big blind open, but you can sort of see similarities. All right, so this is the preflop range for the 3-bet. And this is the call versus the 3-bet. So here on this flop, you got, well, pre-flop, this is around 10%, and this is around 17.8%, and there's not a lot of the very strong hands. There's a lot of the very strong pre-flop hands in it. And there's a lot more like suited and connected type stuff. But you can see that there's quite a big range disparity, right? Not only is this almost twice as wide as this one, it's missing a lot of the very strong hands, all of the very strong pre-flop hands. So on this specific flop, because of that range advantage that you have, you've got this 58% equity. You can bet your entire range, and betting your entire range is probably okay, or is definitely okay. And then the size that you choose, half pot. So here in this simulation, I ran it just with 3 different flop sizes: quarter pot, half pot, and pot. And this is a relatively small sim. It's only, I think, 7 gigabytes. So it's not too big. Actually, we have a look at the tree. Sorry, 5 gigabytes, with a few sizes each. So here we see that the preferred bet size is pretty small. And in a lot of 3-bet pot sims, you need to actually start to think about how having bet sizes smaller than quarter pot and getting used to using them. So here quarter pot and like half the range is put into that. So maybe if there was a 1/5 or 1/6 pot size, some hands would be allocated to that as well. Maybe even if there was a 10% pot size, some hands might go into that. But basically, still quite small. Anyway, so if we can have a look at the line that you took. So half pot bet, and then half pot bet, and then all in. So half pot bet, you see that they're mainly calling. The turn is a 3, and so this is what happens to your range. Does anyone have any comments on this?
Yeah, his range, the equity dropped down to about 50%.
So when on the turn, we either check or go full pot, right?
Yeah, so in this sim, remember it's pretty small, so you can't trust it 100%. But yeah, in general, maybe you can say that when you decide to bet the turn, you're sizing up. So you have this small bet on the flop you preferred. Maybe we can have a look at that line as well. So small bet, and this is what happens. But when you choose the half pot bet and called, yeah, you start to size up. Right, so checking a lot.
What does ace queen do with the queen of diamonds?
Ace queen of diamonds bets.
With the spade, it's bets. Okay.
The spade it bets, with a club it bets, with a heart it bets. So ace queen with a queen of diamonds likes to bet. So maybe what you said about blocking the queen jack of diamonds, or blocking the queen of diamonds, is true. So yeah, betting, I guess, because of your blockers was fine. But the size that it likes is full pot. So we can have a look at the full pot, and then if you bet full pot instead, then you're left with a half pot bet on the river, and you've got ace queen, and it always checks ace queen, so it's check. And then if you get shoved on, you're like indifferent to calling.
Right.
But if you bet half pot and then it's a call, still ace queen is always a check, right? So the whole idea of you going all in on this river is probably not ideal because of the idea of just you folding out all of the worst hands, well, most of the worst hands, and
So
only getting called
what
by better too much.
What if the flop is like draw heavy? Do we still bet small?
Well, it depends on how that flop interacts with both players' ranges. But usually, because of how much tighter your range is compared to your opponents, if the flop is draw heavy, you're just going to have more of the draws, which is better for you than your opponent. Or if the flop is connected, then depending on how high up that connection is, you're going to have more of the straights and more of the sets.
Only on flops like middling connected boards, I think it's gonna be a problem. Flops like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 or something, or 4, 5, 6, and you're lacking the bottom set and the 2-pair combinations, right?
Yeah, so if we look at the pre-flop, 4, 5, 6 is probably pretty bad for you. But something like 10, 8, 7 is okay for you because you've got probably just as many sets and straights as they do, if not more.
Yeah.
Because of the difference in range strength. And then you just have over pairs. So I imagine if you run the sim, you would still be betting at quite a high frequency. And I think that the width of the two ranges, that width difference between 10% and 18%, makes it so that on so many flops you're betting your entire range, and then on the turn after you get called, you're checking to them a lot, right? So here, if we look at on this, instead if we didn't bet half pot, we bet quarter pot instead, and we're called, and the turn is a 3. You can see that you can go small again, right? here, jacks, like tens, queens, into the small bet size, and they're technically value bets, remember, even if you're not getting called by a range which is less than 50%. Remember,
This is really cool.
this is for a quarter pot bet.
Okay. Okay. This is something that I never do, so this is really cool. Is there a noise coming from my microphone?
I think so. There's some sort of background noise. Anyway, so yeah, and then when you do decide to continue, either you can use this sort of small bet size as like these thin out of position sort of value bet type stuff, and a larger size with the intention of just getting it in on the next street. Maybe if I put a 3/4 pot size, that might be used instead, or maybe if I put like a 1.25 or 1.5 pot size, that might be used. But here, just for a pot, just pot it, they call, and then yeah, half pot is still used, and with the intention of probably just calling off a jam, will be indifferent with ace king. Actually, you could sometimes jam aces. Anyway, so the moral of the story with this, and as well as the other examples that we looked at, is that out of position, when we have sort of this range advantage, we can press our range advantage by betting small and wide on the flop, and then checking at reasonably high frequency on the turn, or continue betting for a small size to keep denying equity. So say we use a small size and then we're called. Right, with the Jackson tens, we can just check, and hopefully they would check back. Right, with a weaker hand, and then when we face a bet, we can decide if we want to call or not, because we're indifferent there, and we're indifferent here. So that's the story with Jackson tens on the queen run out. And maybe if it was sort of like a brick, say a 2, then the jacks are still being bet here for value. Right, so remember, out of position value bets are different. But here, jacks is being bet for value to try and get called by worse. This is for a half pot bet. Maybe if I ran with more bet sizes on the river, jacks might be put into a smaller bet size, similarly with tens. So does anyone have any questions about what I've said, just going through this sim? Because I know I've said a lot, and I probably haven't explained all of it very well. And if you guys have any questions, just ask me.
On this particular sim you're showing, I'm just curious to see on the turn with what the range would look like if you decide to continue betting but go polar, go a larger size. What are some of the value and bluff hands? You said continue small, like with Jackson tens, but where would you be going polar if?
Yep. So here the polar range is a pot size bet, and it's with like the aces, ace king, sort of for value. If we narrow it down to just that, and then it's still quite a mix, but a lot of it is king X here, and then like non king X. Right. You can see that jump in the EV, in the equity distribution between king X and then hands which aren't king X. It goes from 80% with kings and then drops down to tens with 62%. So like some middling stuff. This is still like thin value stuff, but
and then your bluffs are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the bluffs would just be like air withdrawals,
like gut shots and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 6-7, right.
Just remember, yeah, if we bet pot, they still have to call with a 9 some of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you're thinking about the opponents that you're playing against exploitatively, in a 3-bet pot like this, if you bet, say quarter pot on the flop, and then they call, the turn is a brick, and now you pot it.
They're folding their nines.
A lot of players just aren't going to have the stomach to call with the middle pair anymore in a 3-bet pot after facing a pot size bet on the turn. So they might be overfolding by quite a large margin there, and so you can allocate more bluffs to that size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is imposition's response to our turn small betting line? Oh, he raises quite a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
What do we do when he raises?
So if you look at the equity distribution, so some of the nut hands, so like 9s and 8s at the very top, they're mainly in the small size. Like kings definitely makes sense to bet small, and 9s and 8s, they're betting small or checking with the intention of raising. Here 8s is betting big or checking with the intention of raising, right? So check, say a face half pot bet, raising quite a bit. Face a pot size bet, raising quite a bit. So betting small and then facing a raise, right? A lot of it can just fold. A lot of times you can just be indifferent and then continuing with
Tens
the top
are
pairs.
calling sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes, right? So it's just indifferent, right? So if your opponent is bluffing enough, then you can call some of the times. If your opponent isn't bluffing enough, you just fold.
Okay.
9s is the 9x stuff is calling a lot.
Yeah. Yes. Makes sense.
So yeah, Jack, this was your hand. Do you have any questions about this simulation, and maybe you can do you think that you would play the hand differently now that you've seen this sim, or would you play similar hands differently?
I would check the river.
Yeah. So that's a good. That's definitely a good thing. I imagine betting not to be very good. So we can have a look at the EV difference specifically for that between the line that you took between betting and checking. So EV ace queen. So yeah, betting was. So here the pot size is 64, and checking, EV of checking is around 25, so it's about 40% of the pot. And then betting anything reduces that EV, which is why you check everything. But specifically all in, it reduces it from 25 to around 17 or 15, which is a 10 big blind mistake in terms of EV. Which is quite a lot. A 10 big blind mistake here and there is roughly equivalent to you not being dealt aces, being dealt or not dealt aces pre-flop, right? The EV of aces pre-flop is around 10 big blinds.
Right. That's a huge mistake.
Yeah, quite a big mistake.
I'm not getting used to use the small flop c-bet. You have any tip on applying it?
Yep. So if you want to simplify, right, and simplifying is one thing that you can do even though you lose a bit of EV, is you can just put everything into that size. So definitely out of position, right? Out of position is a lot tougher than in position, and because it's a lot tougher, you need to study more. Okay, and by studying more means you need to run more sims and look at where the solver, if you have a big enough tree, the solver will do. If you have a small tree, the solver will do some weird things, and that might just be because the tree is small. But if you have a very big tree, then the solver probably isn't doing things for no reason, because the solver is probably not making much of a mistake. All right, and because of that, you want to pay close attention to what the solver is doing that's different to your strategy. And a lot of the intuition which you have for playing in position just isn't applicable to out of position, right? This idea where you can't just go bet, you have to bet small and then often check the turn, or bet small and then polarize the turn, is very different from in position. Well, it's actually not too different from in position. In position, you can bet small on the flop and then polarize the turn. So that sort of idea holds, but you just got to be a lot more comfortable with betting the flop and then checking out of position on the turn, knowing that your opponent is going to stab a lot, and then just giving up those hands, giving up weak hands out of position after you check. Right. So there's like this and when you like start moving up in poker, you get this idea of trying to win every pot, and so just like, oh, if I check, I'm going to lose. Maybe if I bet, my opponent will fold, right? And then you just end up way over bluffing,
Right.
So be careful of that sort of mentality, right? If your hand is weak, it's probably going to lose anyway, right? So be okay with losing if you just miss the flop, right?
Okay.
Be okay with losing at a high frequency if you just miss the flop. So betting, and then they call, and then say it wasn't a 3 of, say it was a 5, maybe not a 5, maybe an offsuit 2, right? And then you check ace queen, and then you face a bet, and then you can fold it. But it's not just that. It's just that it's also stuff like here, king 10, and king jack, and king king. These hands are all checked some of the time.
Right.
So when you move to the turn, remember when you check, you're checking a lot of hands which are just going to give up. And so because you have so many hands which are just going to give up, and those hands still have the ability to outdraw some of your opponent's hands, when you check, your opponent wants to bet in order to get those hands to have a tough time seeing the river, right? In order to get those hands to pay to see the river. So since your opponent is betting a lot, it makes sense for you to check a lot with some strong hands, because it's a lot easier to get your opponent to bet for you if they're betting at high frequency. So it's a lot easier to get a bet out of your opponent by them betting for you than it would for you to bet and having them call. Right? It's actually easier to do that if your opponent wants to bet at high frequency. So here they check, and then they're betting around a third of the time. Okay. So say it goes check, check, and there's another brick. Right, and then so all these top pairs are going to be betting. And check, and then sort of bet, and then you can check raise the ace king on this this sort of thing, which probably is not done enough, I think. All right, so are we all happy about this hand and the sims from this hand? Does anyone the sim on this hand? Does anyone have any questions about any more questions about what I've said, or wants any clarification about anything that I've said? Otherwise, we can have a look at some other hands. All right. Okay. All right, George, this is one of your hands. So what do you think? So what were you thinking when you're playing this hand?
Yeah, so I think in the small blind here, well, in my thinking, it's pretty standard to 3-bet Jack 9 suited to a button open, 2.5 big blinds. The flop is low and connected. which puts, well, just thinking through this, I mean, it puts a lot of nut hands in the buttons range. I mean, he's got all the sets, possibly two pair. Now my thinking was I was going to check. I was kind of torn between check calling and check raising, because the way I look at it, if I check raise, I can continue barreling here, because, and this is just maybe a superficial thinking, but I think when I check raise and I get a call, then I can't really think that villain is very strong, that I can continue barreling to hopefully try to get him to fold if the flush doesn't come in. But in this case, I chose the check call, and I'm not sure if that's a mistake or not. I think that's my first question is on the turn, whether I should be check calling or check raising, or betting out, actually.
Okay, and then I guess the rest of the line is okay. Does anyone else have any comments about this hand?
I think the line is perfect. I mean, I would play exactly the same. And I think if you want to check raise the flop, you want to have things like you want to have better flush draws, basically, because when we check raise, we risk getting 3-bet, and this hand it doesn't perform well against the 3-bet. So I would rather check raise something like, I mean, it's obvious, but something like ace-6 of spades or something like ace-4 of clubs that can just fold, you know. And
yeah, it doesn't mind folding if I get. Yeah, it doesn't mind folding if I get 4-bet.
Yeah, and this against this flop small bet, we can call pretty easily. And this flop is definitely not good for our range, for sure, because button is gonna have all the two pairs, except for the 3-7 suited, and button is gonna have this straight, whereas we won't.
And he'll have all the sets too.
Yeah, like we're not gonna have pocket threes, and we might not have pocket fives. I think checking 100% is gonna be somewhat okay here. Maybe not 100, but close to 100.
Yeah, that sounds really bad. We can have a look at the ranges in Equilab if you want. Okay, so maybe not that anymore. Maybe not because I haven't run the sim on it. But basically, maybe we can have a look at it instead of versus the 2.5 versus the 2x. Okay, I'll do it over here. Basically, this is the maybe you can compare them side by side and have a think about how these two ranges are going to work on this board. All right. So here, this is the small one versus button 2.5. But maybe to make it fair, I might make it versus 2 instead. So pretend that the button versus opened two big blinds, just so that we can have a fair comparison of the two ranges in terms of their strength. Right. So how much tighter is the small ones versus the big ones, do you think? How do these two ranges compare on the specific flop?
They're pretty similar, but the only difference is button has a lot more stronger hands. I mean, a lot more nutted hands.
Nutted hands, yeah.
I'm not sure that is true, right? So what extra nutted hands do you think that button has compared to you, right? There's a couple of
because we are 3-betting 7s and 5s here, and some 3s.
But like button has 3-5 suited, 5-7 suited, 4-6 suited, and we're not 3-betting pocket threes all that often. I guess aces is kind of close to being nutted because not a lot of two pairs in sets. I mean, you can't have a lot of two pairs in sets. I guess all pairs are kind of close to being nutted, but not. I mean, not nutted, of course, but close.
Let's see. Button has 6-4 also, doesn't he? Some 6-4s.
Yeah.
Yes, my big question, I guess, is what should I be doing on the flop? I mean, should I be betting out or check calling, check raising?
Oh, those are 30%. Okay.
Well, for the sims which I run, I often use 30% and 70%.
So when you say
just to make
call
it
or
easy.
fold, you're meaning 30%.
Well,
I usually do 50.
Yeah, me too.
When you say call,
it makes a lot less of a difference than you'd think, right?
Oh, okay.
A couple of percent.
Yeah.
So if you like being a bit looser, then be a bit looser. You like being a bit tighter, then be a bit tighter. But
yeah,
I don't think it makes very much difference.
Yeah, it's a very marginal difference.
What if I wanted 30%? I want jacks with 30%. Okay. Say 70%. I want to get rid of. Okay, and now the flop that we have.
7-3-5. Club and 2 spades.
All right, so we can just run through it and just see how many nut hands they do have, right? Is that all the hands that big aces? So like 8%. Sorry, not even 8%. 6.5%.
Of the range, yeah.
Okay, so 6.5% for bottom. Okay, and then you're in the small blind. 7s, 5s, 3s, right? And that sort of sets a better 3%. And then if you want to count aces, it becomes pretty much the same, right? 6% in terms of like these nut hands, like aces or better, right? But if you consider that they don't have kings or queens, then you can put them in because it counts.
Yeah, then you've got more nutted hands. Yeah.
So then you can think about in terms of nuts and like how strong is the nuts, like really, really nutted hands or just like hands which beat all the other pairs, right? Hands which beat all the other pairs is definitely you. You're doing very well here, right? Because you have way more hands which beat all the other pairs than they do. Okay. And even when it comes to sets, like you're not too far behind. 3% versus 6.5%. I think you might.
So those strong pairs, those overpair hands that beat overpairs plus. I want to have a good portion of them in my betting range, don't I? On the flop.
Yeah. So on this flop, I would be much more inclined to bet. So we can have a look at the overall strength of the ranges. Okay, and just like running those two, and it's pretty close to 50-50 in terms of the range strength on this board. So like the overall average. And now if we want to have a look at the equity graph, we can calculate that as well. So this is like the very narrowed hands. So obviously sevens and stuff. Who is who? So hero. So yeah, blue here is in position, and actually I might do the other way. Make it hero.
I got like 8% of hands, so I should be betting. Yeah.
Yeah, blue is us in the small blind, and green is villain in the button. So you can see like this graph that there's not a lot of big difference, right, between the two. It's not like if you run one of these equity distribution graphs and you see that one guy's goes like this and the other guy's goes like this, right? This means that here, that person has a nut advantage over the other guy, right? So this could be just like sets or whatever, but that's not very pronounced here. Okay. So here, yeah, all right. They might have like a nut advantage in terms of how many of the in terms of like how many of the hands which have a lot of equity, right? The very, very strong hands. But then afterwards, you're doing pretty well, right? With your strong but not super, super strong hands. All right, you're doing better than they are. Okay, so they need to use these very strong hands in order to protect the rest of their range. So betting is okay, especially with the SPR being lower in 3-bet pots. I would be much more inclined to bet small.
Bet a quarter pot.
Yeah, bet small with a reasonably good chunk of my range at least. Might have to run a sim to decide on how much that would be. But I would be happy with betting. I guess if I decide to have a checking range, Jack 9 of spades might be a part of that as well. With the intention of sort of like check raising, like a hand like aces, kings, or queens, maybe with a spade. Right. So in these 3-bet pots, right, the SPR is really low, so you shouldn't be very scared of running into sets too much, right? The SPR is only like 4.5.
Yeah, I mean your aces and kings are going to get stacked occasionally. You just got to live with that.
Yeah, but the times that they get stacked is made up for by the times that you stack the jacks or tens or whatever.
And which flop is like not good for us? Like if this is a good flop for us, which flop is bad for us? I assume that this would be the worst flop for us almost.
Well, it's not the best flop for us, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we have much better flops.
It's not an amazing flop, but overall, you've got 55 to 44%.
Oh, we are 55. Okay.
Pre-flop, yeah, your small blind range versus the button calling range.
No,
55 to 40.
no, I mean
it's 45.
No, I mean on the flop.
On this top is 50-50.
I was always checking my whole range when it's 50-50 or below. Like if I lose the equity advantage, or if it's a toss up, I just
in a 3-bet pot that's pretty bad to do.
Okay.
Okay, maybe you can get away with it in a single raise pot, but in 3-bet pots you just need to have some of your ranges needs to bet. Right. Remember the whole we can bet small out of position for value. These value bets out of position don't have to be more than 50% equity, so they can be smaller, right? You can do a small bet and then bet out of position. Maybe if I bring up the slides from that video, I can show you.
This is all because of Nick Howard, to be honest.
Yeah, the whole simplifying everything, I mean, it's okay, but then you just get run over against a player that knows that you're simplifying. Or even against a player that has a tendency to adjust well against players that simplify. Which a lot of players do, right?
Yeah.
Like adjusting your strategy to beat players which like to simplify is actually easier than trying to play GTO.
Well, yeah, since they're only taking one option. So
yeah, right. If you're taking this is I'm just going to go on a rant for a few minutes if you guys don't mind. If you're just taking one option, then they don't have to study it. They don't have to study very much, right? They don't have to like take hours and hours off the table figuring out how to deal with your flop overbet, right, or whatever. Versus if you've done that, you just have an edge in this spot, right?
Yeah.
You know which hands you're going to overbet here. You know which hands you can underbet and overbet the next street. You know which hands you can overbet, shove 5x the pot for value, and they don't. And then when they see that you do it, they just like give up and then fold, right? Or give up and then call, or give up and make like these enormous 20 BP EV mistakes.
Yeah.
Against you. So yes, simplifying just to make it easier isn't the way to go, right? Like if you think about it this way, right? If you can imagine you want to get really good at chess, and chess is a very different game to poker, but it's sort of the same idea, right? You want to get really good at chess. Does it make sense to play an opening that is very simple? Right? No, right? It makes more sense to try and push as much as you can to get an advantage out of the opening as possible, rather than playing it simple than having your opponent being able to outplay you later on. Right? You want to push all the edges that you can as possible. And if you can think of earlier streets being sort of similar to in sort of idea as the opening in chess, like you want to push your advantage as much as you can all the time.
Okay.
Right, and if that means having to study more than the other guy, well, so be it, right? It's a competitive game, you have to study. All right, where am I? Which game was I talking about? This one. So limit 0-1 games extended. Can look like this. Value bet. Oh, I better just jump to the end. This this graph here was the one I wanted to show you, right? So this is the no limit. So this is the limit 0-1 game extended. Here, this is the bet size in terms of alpha, right? And here, this is the frequency out of positions betting for value, and then in position, and both players end up calling at alpha. And then there's like bluffing and folding accordingly. Right, same positions. That's the value bet. That's the bluffs for in position, out of position. Okay, so if you look at it, if you bet very small, you can bet more hands for value. Right. Okay. Obviously, with raises, with the ability for your opponent to raise after you bet, all those hands are going to be shifted up quite a bit as well. Right. So this graph isn't going to be quite as high, and sort of the starting point might not be at 0. But it might be over here somewhere, and definitely that means that out of position when you bet a small size, you can bet hands which will lose more than half the time when your opponent continues. And when you're doing that, you want to use the smaller size. with a larger size, you definitely want to have more than 50%. Well, not really, but you do want to have more than 50% when they do choose to continue.
Yeah.
All right, so you can think about where that might be. If you guys have seen the video, you guys can do the equations about where that might be, where the weakest value hand for Oscar is exactly 50%, right? Or maybe you can just eyeball it from this graph, right? Where is V0 halfway between 1 and F? Maybe around here, maybe around alpha of a third. Maybe it's around here where the bluffing frequency is maximized. I'm not sure. I haven't done the math. But yeah, you can bet small, and then a lot of your hands become more shifted towards more of a thin value type hand instead, right? As well as the idea that you can deny equity, preventing your opponent from checking back.
Okay. Okay, so we can bet most of our range on this board. Maybe.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, if you're on the sim, I'm pretty sure that you'll be betting more than half the time.
Okay.
I have to go now. Thank you for your teaching. It was an eye opener for me.
Yep, no worries. Hopefully you can make one of the other ones. So I run these sort of tutorials every week, every other week.
Right.
So and roughly around this time of week. So if you're available, you can sign up. Have to sign up in the group.
Right. Thank you.
All right. See you, Jack.
Yeah.
All right. So, any question about this one?
When we do check, do you favor check calling, check raising? Should we?
Well, we should have some hands which would do both. So say you had sevens, right? And we'd probably be okay with both check raising and check calling sevens.
No, but like Jack 9 or suited, for example.
Fives might want to check raise. Jack 9 might check call and then check jam the turn, or check raise here and then like check jam. It depends on how big they bet, you know.
Okay. The bigger they bet.
Well, the bigger they bet. So it depends on how many bet sizes that you're using, but usually players will use a variety of bet sizes. So in general, the bigger they bet, the less you're going to raise, the more you're going to call.
Okay.
As a percentage of your continuing. And so then you're just going to be floating more, obviously.
All of what I said was wrong. Okay.
But if you do take this line, like check call line, it seems okay the way you played it.
Okay.
Right. It's just not a line that you would take 100% of the time. Is the point which I'm trying to get at, right? Yeah. So yeah, definitely you could check raise or bet as well.
Okay. I will not check my whole range again. Never.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Run some more 3-bet sims out of position, right? Because you're probably losing a lot of EV doing that. Just because here this is a flop which I'm scared of. I'm going to hemorrhage 10 BB for 100 hands on these types of flops. Not good, right? You should just study how to play them a bit better.
I actually ran a lot of sims with every size put in. Then I ran a sim where I check my whole range. Then I ran a sim where I bet majority of my whole range, and I kind of assumed that like losing 2% EV, 2% of the pot is kind of okay, so I can just check my whole range. But obviously that seems to be a problem.
Well, 20 to start with.
I don't know if it's 2% here, but it's...
You lose 0.4 BB. I don't know. How many BB per 100 is that? 40 BB per 100? I don't know. Like, I don't know. What's your win rate? Is your win rate only 100 of 100? I don't know. You're always 40.
Okay, man. Never checking again. I'll always bet.
Yeah, okay. I'll show you guys how to set up the sim if you want. This was just like a really quick one because I didn't have time to run it on like a full one. But maybe I might show you guys how to get it up to 16 gigabytes or something like that. But yeah, you definitely want a few different sizes on the flop, and then like as I said earlier, you might want to get like a 10% size. But if that makes your tree too big, then just leave that out because it's just getting fancy at that stage, right? But definitely you want a variety of different sizes on the next street. So I would do 25, 50, 100, 25, 50, 100 for those, and then for check raises and raises, I would consider putting 2 different sizes in, but on a 3-way pot, a 50% raise is probably okay. Or if I wanted to make things simple in terms of having a lower tree size, I would set this to 100. And then I would make 50, 100 for all the raises. And as you can see, in a 3-way pot, that doesn't make it too much bigger because the ranges are relatively narrow. So it's getting to 14 gigabytes. So that's with a 10% bet, and then maybe 10% bet for in position if I just wanted to study in position as well. So 17. So you might want to shrink it down somewhere to get under 16 if your computer is 16 gigabytes of RAM. But you'll find in GCO Plus, because of the tricks that they've done, if the tree gets over 3 gigabytes, I emailed the guy, Silica or whatever his name is, and he told me that if the trees get over 3 gigabytes, what they do is they do compression to half the size of the tree. So being a little bit over the amount of RAM that your computer has is okay. And if your computer is only doing sims, then you can do it up to twice the amount of RAM that your computer has, without having too much of a problem, which is how I managed to run 128 gigabyte sims on my other computer, right? And I'm putting them in the library for you guys. So yeah, that's how this setup here is probably how I would do it. And if I wanted to look in more detail, I would add more sizes in on each street, as well as more sizes for the first raise and maybe even the 3-bet. Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, I might end things off, unless you guys want to talk about another hand history.
No, this is really good. Thomas, thanks a lot. I am going to have to drop out though.
That's okay. So see you next time or whenever.
Yeah, see you next time. This is all really useful. Thanks a lot.
All right. Did you have any last questions?
I have one question. Which flop subset do you use when you want to run sims?
Well, the flop subsets are only useful for pre-flop stuff, right? The whole point of the flop subsets is to make the 1775 or whatever strategically different flops, not having to run your pre-flop sim over 1700 different flops, right? Okay. So when I run sims, I want to run enough different flops so that I can get a decent idea about how that type of flop is played in general, right? So that's why I sort of categorize the flops into like the paired boards, and then like high, and you can subcategorize that into high paired boards and low paired boards. Connected flops subcategorize into high connected flops and low connected flops. Monotone boards, high and low, if that's useful to you. And so then I have another categorization system, which is for rag boards and how linked those rag boards are, right? How many straight draws there are on those rag boards. So you basically, to answer your question, you can look at the flop subsets to try and pick out flops that might interest you to run. But if I played a hand the other day and that spot interested me, then I would just run a sim on that exact spot.
Okay, but like, how did you come to the conclusion that, for example, these connected flops, for example, are played similarly enough so that you can categorize them into one category? Like, how did you make this thing? Like, if, for example, let me just ask it in a
Yeah.
better
Okay.
way.
So yeah, we can just.
Like if I want to like run, for example, if after this I'm definitely gonna study 3-bet pots out of position because I obviously do it wrong. But which flops I should just use? There are a lot of flops, so I need to have a way to actually.
Yeah. So the way I did it was I run a bunch of. So say I want to look at connected flops, right? Here was just 12, but I might do it to be 20, and I might do some smaller stuff, right? But I would run a bunch of relatively small trees. I mean, by relatively small, I mean like something like 8 gigabytes. And that would give you a decent enough idea about which flop sizes you can use, which flop sizes are okay to use, and then after I've run all of them, you can see that the strategies for all of them are actually pretty similar in terms of the different turns and rivers and how those are played, right? So you can go through these. These are all 8 gigabyte sims, and 8 gigabytes is enough to see that all of these connected flops are actually sort of played sort of similarly. There might be some subtle differences, but they're all similarly played, right? These kinds of hands are doing the same kinds of things, and these kinds of hands are doing the same kinds of things. And they're with these two ranges, and they're all sort of the same. So that's the first step. So running a bunch of low quality sims, and then the second step would be, say this was 20, I would pick out the 10 that I'm most interested in, build a much bigger tree, and then focus down on the bet sizes which are appropriate for this these types of textures. The flop bet sizes which are appropriate for these types of textures, and then run much bigger trees, and then you've got a strategy for the flop, and if it's saved, you can have it save the turn of the river, or if it's not saved, you can just rerun the turn of the river. So that's sort of what the library of things I'm trying to build up on Zenith is. The very it's like these high quality sims where the flop strategies for both players are really good, and then the turn and rivers, there's enough there for you to learn a lot about poker from. So does that answer your question about how to? That's the sort of I would do it.
Okay. So the library stuff, can we view them without purchasing GTO Plus, or should we purchase that?
Well, GTO Plus, I think they can download like a free trial. I'm not sure whether or not you can view it.
Okay.
So yeah,
okay,
just give it a shot.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Then it's like I don't know, $75 isn't.
Yeah, it's not. I'll have to purchase that.
It's probably, by the time the library is finished, the $75 is probably going to be worth the stuff in the library. So
yeah, yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I'll try and get more stuff up in the library. That's there's like I'm running them in like big chunks at a time, and like if each sim takes like a day or two to run, then it takes a while between each upload.
Okay, nice.
All right, do you have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the valuable lesson.
Yep. Just run some sims, and maybe if you see anything weird, just post it on Zenith, and then we can talk about it.
Okay, I'll do that.
Anything weird, anything different to how you play. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. See ya.
Okay. Bye.